Hello, and welcome to episode 14 of the Life and Finances Together podcast. We want to thank our audience members who have liked and subscribed and encourage you to make that click today if you haven't already. On today's episode, our financial professionals, Roger David and Jake Reinbelt, are going to address a topic that is very important to us here at Reinbelt and David, beneficiary planning. Making sure your beneficiaries are set and accurate on all of your financial accounts. We care so much about this, don't we, guys? So let's talk about it. Roger?
Beneficiary planning, you know what it's like? It's like cleaning out your closet, right? There's stuff in there that you haven't seen in years and weeks and months and whatever. And just like, hey, I just forgot all about that I had that type of thing. Kind of the same thing applies to beneficiary planning. You probably set it up on your retirement plan at work or maybe on a life insurance policy that you took out when you were in your 20s and now you're in your 50s. And you never do what? Go back and look at it. Right? It's a very dangerous thing to do. And it is almost as simple. Well, if you ask my wife and my daughters, it's probably not as simple as cleaning out their closet. That's a whole different story. But it's like just going back and cleaning out that closet, take a look at what you've got. And if everything's in the right place and if, it's still correct, right? So there's questions that you have to ask yourself. I mean, who are you responsible for? Who do you have to take care of? Or who do you want to take care of, right? Are there any estate planning or tax planning things that you need to consider when you're laying out who that beneficiary is? One of the things with minor children, right?
Yeah.
You want to leave that money to minor children.
Yeah, minor children, and even if your children are older, if they're disabled.
Right.
There's certain things when it comes to estate planning, establishing appropriate trusts to receive that money instead of them receiving it outright. These are things that you have to think about.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the questions. Here's the best question, right, that all of us get to maybe revisit around the holidays. What's my relationship with my family and my friends that I designated as beneficiaries a few years ago, right? Or decades ago? I mean, they might not even be around, unfortunately, right? Sadly, they could have been passed away. But the other thing, too, is you just may not like them anymore. And that Thanksgiving and Christmas holiday, it just isn't the same. And I don't know if you're going to want to leave that money to them. I mean, that's another question to ask, right? I mean, the other thing, too, is your attorney. What did your attorney say? Mm-hmm. What did your tax planning or your CPA or your attorney, what did they tell you to do? Have you done it? I mean, so many times what happens with that, right? We've seen it, right? You have the estate plan done, it's all done, they lay everything out, and then what do?
Forget to fund it.
You don't
actually do what you have.
Yeah, you just don't do it, right? You're like, I meant to do that a few years ago. But one of the things you have to remember when you're doing this beneficiary designation, it's a very simple thing to do. But I'll tell you what, it can be a very costly thing if you don't do it and you don't keep up on it and update it. I mean, that's one of the major things that we see so often. When people come in the office and they're new clients and maybe they've been with another advisor, or maybe they were just doing it themselves. And all of a sudden we start looking at all the statements and all their supporting documentation and we find out what? We find out they haven't updated their beneficiaries in maybe 15, 20, or even longer. I mean, that's just, you don't want to do that. It's a simple thing to do, and you have to make sure that you're staying on top of it. So one of the things that a lot of people just don't realize, like, hey, I didn't realize I could designate a beneficiary in a certain account. I mean, whether it be a retirement plan, a life insurance policy, even an account at the bank. Mm-hmm. And it's called a TOD, or a transfer on death account. You can actually designate a beneficiary on those accounts, right? So you just want to know which accounts you can designate a beneficiary on. Because again, that beneficiary designation supersedes anything else. Your will, a trust, hey, you're going to assign who is going to get that money, right? And you just have to know that. What accounts can I designate for that? Now, here's one of the other things. And people will do this. And they'll say, well, I just never got around to designating a beneficiary. I did everything online. I put my name in, my address. I put the investments in on my IRA, whatever it may be. And what's the one thing that you don't do?
Designate the beneficiary.
Tell you where it's going to go in the event that anything bad happens. Well, of course, nothing ever bad is going to happen, right? That's what we all think. But we never know. It's the sad part of life. So you need to make sure that you're at least designating a primary beneficiary and a contingent beneficiary. So that primary beneficiary, like if you're dealing with an IRA, it's probably your spouse, right? It can be other entities, it can be other individuals, but you have to make sure that you have a primary beneficiary in there and then a contingent beneficiary. So you have an account. Your primary beneficiary that you designated passes away before you do, right? Now the contingent kicks in.
Or at the same time as you.
Could be. Yeah. I mean, very true. So you want to make sure that you have both in there. Who are you going to leave those insurance proceeds to, that bank account to, that IRA asset or the 401k at work? Who are you going to leave it to? Primary and beneficiary. It's so important, and it's just a very simple thing. I mean, some of the other things we deal with, believing that your will supersedes it, right?
Yeah, and you had mentioned that earlier, Roger. I want to touch on it too. People think that a will supersedes beneficiary designations. Well, it really doesn't. Or people think that a will is enough when, you want to have control over how things are taken care of, how things get split up amongst people after you've passed. Well, beneficiary is the first and foremost, the first line of defense to avoid probate. And that's really what we're talking about here. We want to avoid probate so that the court is not determining who receives your money. And that goes beyond just investments and includes your home, your other assets, and that's where estate planning comes in with trust documents, with wills, which is kind of like an ultimate backstop, a will is. But a will, if a will is being enacted, your stuff is in probate. Our goal is to try to address these things and avoid probate. And the best way to do it is by defining and designating these beneficiaries.
And if you don't designate a beneficiary, it's going to probate.
Exactly.
Right? It's part of your estate.
Yep. If you do not, anything that is a beneficiary-driven asset, which primarily we think of IRAs, 401ks, those type of qualified retirement plans, and life insurance, but like Roger mentioned, it can be your bank accounts too, right? There are different assets or non-qualified investment accounts that you can treat or retitle as a TOD or a POD, or the acronyms, and name beneficiaries. When you list a beneficiary, it avoids probate. It goes directly to whomever as a person or an entity that you've listed. If you don't have beneficiaries listed, it's going to go through probate. That's when your will kicks in, like I mentioned. It is a backstop. It does give direction, but you're still getting into the probate process. The court has to go through it all, and it can get messy. So the idea is handle all this stuff, take care of it while you're still alive, and you are of sound mind and can decide who you want to receive your stuff, but you have to keep up with it because things do change over time.
When you're designating a beneficiary, it avoids probate completely. And that's so many times that's what our clients say, well, I don't want to go through probate. I heard it's pretty bad. Well, it can be bad, it can be easy, it can be all kinds of different things.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you just don't want to go through it, right? I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah, it's kind of, probate is treated like purgatory, if you will, or just like this awful place to be at. And it's really not, but it is something that is totally avoidable.
Right.
Right, at least for most things that would pass after your death. But what we're talking about today, when you can designate a beneficiary on an investment account, there's no reason not to do it. And there's no reason for that to have to flow through probate. That's pretty much what we're getting to. And like we'd mentioned earlier too, situations with family members change. Whether it be they're no longer in favor anymore, you don't want them to receive any of your money, or God forbid they've passed. I mean, we've, unfortunately, with some clients or clients that have come to our firm, we've heard the horror stories about, oh, I got divorced and I didn't take my spouse off, right? And we've seen them. We've caught them, right?
Yeah.
But we've also heard people that didn't update their beneficiaries after a divorce or after a family member passed, and then they passed. And now the court, again, is determining who receives their money, and it may not be who you would think would receive your money. Right? And you don't want the court to have to determine that, and the rules for how the courts assess that, they can vary from state to state. So you just don't want to mess with probate.
And we had a situation, wasn't it, with a mom and a son?
Yeah.
Or something like that. Did you have that situation where it was done incorrectly?
Yeah, exactly. It's done incorrectly. And,
what happened there?
You would have thought that the mom was going to receive the funds. Right. Those were the expressed wishes of the individual that passed, but those wishes were not put onto a beneficiary form and submitted. So that was not there. And now someone who is not his mom is receiving those funds, right? You need to have a beneficiary form filled out, submitted with the appropriate details, and submitted to the company that manages your investments so that it's on file.
And that was what? They just didn't update the beneficiary designation? Is all it was?
Yep,
A
that's
simple
all it
little
is.
thing like that. And all of a sudden, and understand one thing is, well, it's not a big deal. Well, hey, if you're in your 50s or your 60s, you're getting ready to retire, a lot of times these account balances, if it's a retirement plan, are 6 figures or 7 figures. And you got where do you want all that money to go? And then big life insurance policies too, right?
Yeah.
Usually a few $100,000. Is it going to the right place? Most people forget that, hey, they just call it general life insurance or my retirement plan. And they don't go back and realize, boy, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right? And realize it's just one account, but that one account might hold a lot of assets, right?
Yeah, the biggest thing is you don't want to leave any of this up to chance. You just take control. You know who you want to list. And even if you take the step where you're finally filling out a form, put the information in correctly.
Yeah.
Right? If you've got a daughter, for example, or someone who gets married and their legal name changes, go and update your beneficiaries. I know it's a pain. I know it's an extra step or two that you don't want to take, but just do it, right? If you're listing a trust, make sure you name your trust appropriately, that the correct Social Security number or tax ID is associated with it, and the date of the trust.
Right.
Right? You need to make sure that the information is correct. You could say, oh, whoever it is will figure it out. Well, you hope, right? But you shouldn't hope. You can take the proper steps to avoid any of that misunderstanding after you've passed.
And you got to make sure that you have the documentation. I mean, with most companies now, right? Maybe not a life insurance company, with some 401k companies or like a retirement plan or IRA investment companies, that's on you. Mm-hmm. They actually don't hold the beneficiary designations with those companies.
Yeah.
They're going to go to the advisor. They're going to look at the file or maybe your file that you have at home and say, well, whatever you've got in there that has the latest date on it with a signature on it, that's what we're going to go with.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's something that you just have to watch out for. You think it's so simple and so easy, and like, well, gosh. Well, hey, have you looked? Have you reviewed it? Right? I mean, the other thing too is you look at other things like special circumstances. I mean, that can range from a number of different things on special circumstances. Do you have that family member that's just really not good with money?
Yeah.
Maybe they're what we like to call maybe, a ding dong or somebody that just doesn't, that's not really, that's one of our vocabulary words here at Rhineville and David is the ding dong. And they're just not responsible with money, or maybe you just don't want them to have all that money right away. Well, do you designate them individually as a beneficiary or maybe as a trust, right? Where you can kind of control the money from the grave. Do you have children or a beneficiary that has special needs? Well, if they're receiving government benefits and they receive a lump sum amount of money because they were a beneficiary, you might put them in harm's way of being able to continue to receive their government benefits.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's certain things you can do and structure it in certain trusts and in certain ways to make sure that that doesn't happen. Right? I mean, we've seen a couple things. We've seen the one, the divorce one where
Yeah.
I've been divorced for 15 years. I'm remarried and I never changed the thing. Nobody's responsible to make sure that's done other than you.
Yeah.
Right? You've got to do that. I mean, I'd love to see, the kitchen table, hope nobody passes away, but
Yeah.
now all of a sudden the second wife and all the money's going to the first wife.
Yeah.
You're going to have a pretty cooperative ex-spouse to be able to make sure that goes to the current spouse, right? It can be done. Odds are it might not be done, but that's going to be an interesting thing to have to worry about. So again, it's so easy. It sounds so easy. It just sounds, well, it's not complicated. And what happens with things like that, you just say, well, I'll get around to it, right? That's not a big deal. It'll take me 5 minutes. Yeah, I'll get around to it. You know what? I'll do it tomorrow morning or over the weekend. And then what happens? You don't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
You just don't do it. Literally, it's a process that takes minutes. And if you need help in understanding, where does it have to go? I mean, go back to the legal documents that you created, right? Your estate plan, making sure that it's in line with what the attorney and the CPA has told you to do. I mean, just get that done. I mean, have you ever seen that where, hey, they had it wrong?
Yeah.
Where maybe it's supposed to go to
either
individual or
it's-
trust?
Yeah, either it's a former trust that they've replaced with a
Right.
new trust that
Even-
they didn't actually
right.
change that, right?
And the wording's different.
Yeah.
And the
wording's
title's different.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's little things like that. That's why we say attention to detail is very important when you're listing these beneficiaries. It's not every situation requires a trust. More complex situations might,
Right.
having younger children might, disabled children, as we mentioned. But it doesn't need to be that complicated all the time. It really is. List whomever you want to receive your money should you pass away today. And it seems redundant. It seems like, I got to go the extra mile just to do this. Well, it doesn't take very long, and we recommend at least once a year that you take a look at your beneficiaries. Just make sure that they are the way that you want them to be. And as things get more complex, if you do the legal documents, then your attorney should be giving you exact direction on what needs to be done so that you're properly titling your assets.
I mean, along those lines too, is any attorney that's developing estate planning documents, it doesn't always happen. You're going to need, funding instructions, right?
Yep.
How do you title everything? What's a beneficiary? What's not a beneficiary, right? So you should get that direction from the attorney. Don't just get those documents done and leave the office. They're not going to get done properly. They're not going to get funded properly. And I'll tell you what, it can result in some very costly mistakes from just legal fees and tax fees that you're going to have to, at the time of death, you're going to have to pay to kind of get everything squared away. And guess what? The IRS, right, they're probably not going to be that understanding. You've got to make sure that it's done right. So in most cases, the primary beneficiary, if you're married, right, is going to be the spouse.
Yep.
Have people made that mistake? Yeah. Hey, so I was told to leave it to my trust. Well, no, not if you're still married. Right? The primary beneficiary should probably be the spouse. Maybe the contingent is the trust.
Yeah.
So we've seen that go wrong too.
Yeah, and again, it does get a little bit more complex when trust comes into the mix, because we've seen it before with attorneys where, like Roger said, on an IRA, the spouse is the primary, trust is contingent, but on the life insurance policy, the trust is listed as the primary
Right.
beneficiary. So that's where, if you go through the steps, you're paying a lot of money to get these documents created. You want to make sure that you implement them appropriately, and that you're also asking your attorney for the explicit direction on how to list the beneficiaries in the name of the trust that you've created.
And these are just a few of the mistakes that you can make. I mean, some of the other mistakes maybe come after the passing of the account owner or the insured on a policy. You've got to also maybe sit down with those beneficiaries and educate them on what the responsibility is going to be, in the event that they pass away, right? The account holder passes away. So, I mean, everybody needs to be clear on what has to happen. In addition to the beneficiary designation, you might want to provide some kind of instruction, right? That could be something that's tied to the beneficiary or to the legal documents that you have, estate planning documents, and say, hey, here's the steps that you need to take, right? Even after I'm gone. And now you are the beneficiary. There could be some responsibilities, or at least maybe some tax implications you're going to need to be aware of, right? And have a good understanding of that. And that always comes down to good financial planning, right? When you're looking at your financial plan, you're talking to your advisor. I mean, what do? We do it every single meeting. We see clients twice a year, and what are we doing?
We still review it every meeting.
Every single meeting.
So every 6-7 months, even though we're meeting with them, like Roger said, twice a year in that time frame, we're always going back just to make sure nothing's changed. They didn't provide us with incorrect information. Legal names haven't changed. Social security numbers are accurate. It's something that we wholeheartedly believe you need to stay on.
Jake, has it been more than once that we've actually done this thing, maybe within a 1 or 2 year period, and we had to change it?
Yes.
I mean, a lot of people say, well, it was only a year, 2 years ago. I probably don't need to change it. I can't even tell you how many we've changed where they said, you know what? Yeah, my cousin Joe, I don't like cousin Joe anymore. Cousin Joe's not going to get any money, right? Those are the simple ones where you're just like, hey, but there's a lot of other things that you can forget. Just a lot of complicated things you forget to do. So you want to make sure that in its simplest terms, when it comes to beneficiary designations, designating those beneficiaries, you just do this simple little thing. Just do it. That's it. Just do it and take a look at them and make sure that your wishes are going to be followed through on according to that beneficiary designation.
Yep.
So it's all a part of making sure that, you're bringing, like we like to say, in the firm, bringing life and finances together, right? You've always got to do it. What are those relationships, and how does it relate to my finances while I'm alive and if I'm not here any longer? So remember, beneficiary planning. It's easy. It's simple. Just do it.
Yes.
Thanks so much for watching, for listening, and for learning about beneficiary planning with us today. For questions about our financial services or finances in general, please check out our website, that's reinveltdavid.com. Send us an email, give us a call, and of course, please like and subscribe to our podcast and stay tuned for our next episode.
This podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only and is not intended as personal financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please do your own research and consult a financial advisor as needed.